Today's video is all about a template. So I'm going to use a Slice of Life Templates 2 from Scrapping with Liz and the Alley Oop collection by Paisley Press and show you how I start with a template when I'm making a scrapbook page. So the first thing that I've done is I've opened up the template so you can see it. I can see that there's a spot for two different photos. Now I have already pre-picked my photos out to make this go a little faster because I can debate on photos a lot and take a long time picking them out. For the template, you'll notice the very back white paper is labeled background. There usually is a background paper of some sort in most templates. And then all of the rest of the pieces are just, think of a hamburger. They're just slices on a hamburger. So the bottom bun is your background, and then that light blue paper is on top of that, and then the different pieces are layered on top of that. So the parts that you're going to see is whatever's on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting my photos in so that I can see how they fit in those squares. I use a lot of shortcuts when I use Photoshop, so I do use the shortcut Control G to create the clipping mask, but you can also right click and use the menu. Almost towards the bottom is a create clipping mask, and that will also do the same thing. Once you hit the clipping mask, you'll notice that your photo fits perfectly in the box, and then you can adjust it from there. My photo is much bigger than the box, so I do go ahead and pull it down and make it fit inside the box. And that I knew the crop would be smaller, but I also know that this photo is about I think it's about a 3.5 by 3.5 square, and that's a fine size for the photo in the end when I print it. So the first photo I wanted to focus on Olive, him holding it, and then the second photo I wanted to focus just on his hand gripping that ball. This is something that my son's actually been working on for a while now. It feels like years, trying to be able to one palm that ball, and he was so excited that he finally can do it. So while I wanted his expression in the first one, in the second one it was more about his hand holding that ball where you could really see him gripping it. I do have dual screens. So on my other screen, I have the program that I put all my supplies in up. And so I'm just pulling straight from there onto my Photoshop canvas. You can do the same thing with folders in Windows or in Mac. So to show off that I was really focused on this ball part, I did want to bring that arrow in and make sure that it highlighted, look, this is the whole point of this story and the whole point of this page is he was palming that ball. Now, when the arrow first came in, it came in too low on the picture. So this is where that hamburger concept comes in. So I pulled that arrow up higher so that it was sitting on top of the photos so that you could see it. Otherwise, when it first came in, you noticed it was underneath and it was too low and you wouldn't see it correctly. Now comes the playing with papers part. I like to play with papers a lot because sometimes I'm not sure which colors are going to look best with the photo and what part of the photo they're going to bring out. This particular photo, I struggled a little with my papers because that he is all wearing black and then the background is light, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't bringing out too much of the wrong color in the photos. But I just started filling in those different paper pieces with the different pattern papers. So this one's full of word art, so I put that one over that pink paper. And then I did bring in just a straight up orange paper to put in that round ball part. Kind of reminded me of a basketball, so I decided to just fill it in with orange. And then at the top of the photo is a little piece of tape. And the thing about a tape or a flower or a button in a template is you can make a choice. You can either go ahead and fill it with something and use a clipping mask, just like I did before, or you can replace it. So in this case, I decided to replace it. There was a piece of tape that I liked, so I went ahead and pulled that little piece of tape in and decided to just straight up replace the tape from the template with the one that had been created in the kit. The one thing I did keep from the template was the shadow style that was already there for the tape. So what I did is I took my mouse and I just grabbed that FX and I pulled it from the tape place holder up onto the actual piece of tape. So now that one has the same shadow. And I like to start a lot of times with the same shadows from the templates because it can make it quicker for me to go and I don't have to stop and find my own shadow style for each individual piece. Some templates are a little bit more heavy on the shadow styles, so I might change it slightly, and sometimes I just leave it the way that it is. Shadow styles are a whole other video, and you can get really intricate and you cannot, and it is not my forte. So I tend to use already created shadow styles or the ones that are already on templates when I use them. So the next part of this template that I chose to replace was there was this little flower placeholder and button placeholder. And instead of putting a button, I decided to go ahead and use this word art piece because we are still in the middle of basketball season, so it fit for me. And I just liked the word art. But I do like to keep a lot of similar shapes a lot of times. I feel like it helps keep the feel of the template that I originally liked. Although it's a template, you can make it your own however you would like. There's no rules. I know there's a lot of debate on using flowers on pages for boys. I do. I don't care either way. It's for me, it's the shape that I'm looking at. So if I want a little flower on a page that has my son on it, I'll leave it. If I don't, then I'll change it out. It just depends on what the feel of the page is for me and what shapes I'm trying to put on there and what colors. For this particular page, though, I did change out that flower. I brought in a basketball element. I didn't want the little swishes coming off of it though, because I didn't feel like they sat well with the rest of the page. So what I did is decided to do a layer mask in case I changed my mind later. So I used my little brush on black because black conceals and white reveals. And that way I was able to get those swishes off without permanently deleting them. It's kind of a non-destructive way of editing a layer in case I did come back later and go, nope, I do want those swishes. I don't want it to be just two circles right there. So it leaves me that option open. And then I brought in the transparency and then decided that as much as I love the transparency, it didn't really work on this particular page. So back to the other papers to go see what else I could find to bring in and fill. For this particular kit, there was a really nice big word art that just said basketball. It fit perfectly, so I just pulled that in and replaced it. You'll notice it's slightly shorter than the original title. That doesn't bother me. I feel like it still has the same design principle, so it works for me. And now I added a few more pieces of paper and I realized I really didn't like the way that that orange paper was pulling his shirt because he is wearing an orange shirt over to the side. So I decided to flip it back and push it towards the back so that it wasn't quite as visible and pull that lighter blue paper more forward. And then I decided that the orange paper was bright considering everything else that I had put on the page. So I did switch it out for a completely different orange paper. And while it's one of the things I love about digital, it's also one of the things that I sometimes struggle with because I'll get towards the end and decide, nope, I don't like this paper. And so I'll start flipping through a bunch of different papers, trying to decide which one I do really want to be in the background or in the foreground, and that can take up a lot of time. Whereas when I did paper, if it's glued down, it's glued down, I'm committed, and I have to move on. For this little button at the bottom, I decided to actually replace it with that cute little lightning bolt. So I ditched the button completely and just used the little lightning bolt. And some templates have editable fonts. When they do, if you have the font, it'll just go ahead and pick it and replace it. If you don't have the font, you can go in and tell it what to replace it with. Adobe kind of sucks at this and likes to just give you one of its main options, which always seems to be Myriad for me. So I will go and find my own font options that I have. And I do have a lot of fonts that I've downloaded, and it just depends on partially my mood as to what I decide to use to journal or use to put the date on it. I've been in a typewriter or stamp mood for most of my dates. So for this particular one, I did use the font Another Typewriter. It gives it a little bit more of a typewriter look. And then for my fonts, I usually like to pick a color that's in the kit. So it may not be a true black, it may actually be closer to a gray black. For this particular piece of paper that the date is sitting on, I wanted it to match that background color. So I did just go ahead and use the color picker to pick that gray color out of the back. And then I used the paint bucket to dump paint, so to speak, onto that piece so that it did match and it's not quite right white, but also it didn't seem like an off color compared to the rest. I am going to speed up my journaling here because it's kind of boring to watch somebody just sit there and type something out. And I did make a couple of mistakes while I was working on this, and I tend to be one of those people who just goes back and fixes it as I'm writing. But for this, because I wanted to show the edit tool or spelling check tool, I did not fix them as I went. If you go up under the edit file, there's an option to check spelling. And so you'll notice here you can either change what you want it to write to at the top, or if it's in the list, you can pick it and have it change it there. Photoshop is fairly smart, but there are some times that I do have to write in the word that I actually want it to be. And then because I hid that title rather than delete that title, it did offer to check the spelling there and told me, hey, I can't do that because it's hidden. I told it to ignore it because I didn't need it to check that spelling. And this is the point where I went, okay, I think my page is done, and decided to bring in another piece of word art. And then I decided I really wasn't liking that light background. So I decided to bring in all of the dark backgrounds and try them out and see which one that I liked best and that would work the best with the look that I was going for with this particular set of photos. I decided on this one that has a little bit of white writing on it, but that it's majority dark, that dark gray color. So I switched my text out to be white at first, hoping that you could see it on that dark background, and then realizing that wasn't going to work very well because the background was still shining through and the text was kind of hard to read. So at that point, I decided I could either bring in a journal card or I could create a paint mask. And I decided to bring in a journal card. It actually has that basketball symbol that we used earlier, so I kind of liked the tie-in for that. Now for my journaling, what I did is I went ahead and I copied it. I also turned it back to the darker color because it wasn't showing up right on the card. But I didn't like the way that it went over top of that basketball symbol in the bottom. It felt very messy. So I copied my journaling and then I went over and picked up the pen tool. The pen tool can be very intricate to use. I use it very basically. So I drew the outside corners of the box, and then to go around the basketball, you actually have two options. You can just make it sort of work by doing little points like I did to start, or you can make your point, and as you drag your mouse, it will make that curvature effect. So it just depends on how precise you want it to go around something. And then I went ahead and stuck my cursor inside those pen marks, the pen box, and pasted my journaling. And you can see that it wraps around the card and so, or wraps around the basketball on the card. And it gives it that handwritten look. I don't mind that a couple of the pieces are sitting inside or on top of the basketball because if I was handwriting that, it would definitely happen. So it looks more natural to me when it's a little bit like that with the Y right there. And now that I changed the background to be dark, I realized I wanted to change the bracket to not be so dark because it was kind of hard to see and it was a little too much dark. So I switched it out for that lighter blue color. And then I realized that little love of the game word art also kind of disappeared into the background. So I went and I decided that a touch of orange would be perfect to kind of complete a visual triangle with the two basketballs. So I grabbed the orange version of that love the game word art and then simply put it in the exact same spot, made sure that it was lined up the way that I wanted, and then my layout was officially done this time. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed learning how I use a template as a starting spot and how to get started with templates.